Well, this is the third different sermon I've tried to preach this Sunday.
Children's church.
Oh yeah, children's church. Thank you. If any of the kids want to go back to children's church, you're welcome to join. We're going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. You all be glad, because what I was going to preach was a lot harder sermon than what I'm about to give. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. You know, love is an odd word. It means a lot of different things in our time and day, in our English vernacular. I love my wife, Sonia. You like that? For those of you that can see it, that was when she was going back to have Daniel, right before we left, and she was saying, oh, she felt so big, and I told her, you ain't nothing, and we compared, and I was right. And unfortunately, since then, I think I've gained 30 pounds, so, yeah. I can say that I love my wife, but I can also say that I love fried chicken, and you all know that very well. It's cliche, I'm a pastor. Now, this is actually not me eating fried chicken. That was duck. That's my favorite. But the idea is love is rather broad in our language. And I want to tell you, since COVID, I've realized something that's terrible in our world. Especially, I mean, this should just be a knock on all of you mothers. I'm just saying, here in Kentucky. Because apparently nobody knows how to make Kentucky Fried Chicken anymore. Because I don't know if you've been to the one that's over across from Applebee's that's now torn down, but they're always lined up out throughout the corner. And you got to wait 20 minutes to get your fried chicken and your mashed potatoes and gravy and your coleslaw. It's terrible. It's a blight, and we need to fix that. Needless to say, my wife doesn't cook it either, and I wait 20 minutes in line to get your fried chicken. I love my wife, and I love fried chicken, but obviously I don't love them in the same way. It's the word that we have for love today is a rather massive umbrella that lots of love can fit under. I love my children. I love the food that I eat. I love the church that we worship in. But I love them all in different ways. There are so many that fit under this beautiful meaning that we often lose the strength of it because we use it so flippantly in so many different ways. In Hebrew, the word for love is ahab, and it's a verb. Hebrew did not have concepts. They had black and white. If they were going to talk about something that was strong, they talked about a strength. They used it for what its purpose was. And we'll talk about that in a second. In our Greek idea, we get concepts. When they said love, they knew exactly what they were talking about. When we say love, it gets a little confusing. So really quickly, I know if you've been to my church very often, you've heard me do this, but in the old Paleo-Hebrew, when they first started writing Hebrew, they drew pictures that meant meanings. And then those meanings, those pictures, they would put together as letters to form words. And the very first letter of their alphabet, the Aleph, which is R-A today, it was the picture of an ox head because it was strength, it was power, it was the leader, and often it was used to name God. Well, the very next letter is Bet, and it's literally a picture of a house plan, a tent. And that was the home, that was the family. And so what you would do is you would put those two together, the Aleph and the Bet, and you'd come up with Ab, which is father, the head of the home, the head of the family. Well, if you would go one step further with that, they have another letter that's Hey. And it's literally where we get our H from. It's a guy in the Paleo-Hebrew holding his hands up. Hey, look, pay attention. Or it's also someone holding up and opening a window in their tent to let the breeze in. And so the breeze would come in and it meant wind. It also meant spirit, the same spirit that we talked about last week at Pentecost. It meant to look, to reveal, to see. You're about to see something strong. This is the Spirit moving through. This is the wind. When you combine those letters, you come up with a Hab. And the definition for the Hebrew is the essence, the Spirit of the Father, the head of the home. That's what love is. Amen. When you see God the Father, what his heart is, what makes him up, what his Spirit is for each and every one of us, for the entire universe, that's what love is. His heart. So when you go to the Greek, the more conceptual ideas as opposed to bedrock, there was 4 different words. The first one was storge, and it meant for family love. It meant for brothers and sisters. This was us up in Mackinac at one time. The kids thought they'd have a fun time in front of that bear. But you find this word only one time ever in the New Testament, and it's actually a conjunction with another word. The next word that's used is eros. And eros is the word where we get erotic. It's the physical love. It's the physical attraction. It's the burning palpitations of the heart when you see the one that you love. It's God drawing together physically two that would be separate. That's what eros is. By the way, when I went to do a search online, guess which one I didn't search because I knew what I would find in the picture section of Google. I wouldn't advise it. But eros is the physical draw. It's the pull together. God ordained. The problem is, it has very little intimacy. It has very little drawing connection, especially in the world in which we live. You could have eros in one night and be gone and never see them again. And that's not how God ordained it. God wanted something much more intimate. And so the second one is called phileo. And it is the love of a best friend or a close friend. The picture that you have there, this is actually Sonia's best friend, Buffy. She grew up at Mount Carmel together, and this is her telling her that she was pregnant with Daniel. And Buffy's, Phileo is a close companion. You wouldn't necessarily have eros, but it would be someone that you could confide in. It'd be someone that you have an emotional connection in. It's the one when they come in, your heart kind of jumps. You're really happy to see them. You're excited to be around them. You know that if you fall down, they're going to lift you up. This is the idea of phileo. But even in that, it's still a little loose for God's terms. Phileo is great. It's better than eros, and eros even is better than the storge. But God has more than just wanting you to be friends. If you remember the story of Peter, after he had sinned and rejected Christ and denied him at Christ's most dire need, Christ comes back, he comes back to life. They're out on the boat and they're fishing and he's on the shore. He calls to him. Peter jumps out of the boat, rushes to shore, and Jesus and Peter have this discussion. And Jesus starts to ask Peter, Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, well, Lord, I'll be honest. I like you really well. You're like my best friend. The problem was, Jesus didn't ask if he phileoed him. He asked if you agape me. And agape is the greatest of love. Sorry, Grandma.
Hallelujah.
As I was going through pictures and trying to come up with illustrations, this one hit pretty close. And because it was Memorial Day, I saw that they were wearing the red, white, and blue, and they had their flag. I thought it was pretty fitting. But to tell you the rest of the story, which most of you already know, when my grandpa was at his weakest in his mind and couldn't take care of himself, my grandmother vowed that she would never let him go, that she would always take care of him. And that meant some pretty big sacrifices. The rest of us family were all worried that she was going to die of lack of sleep. She had to be alert at all hours because she was worried that he might go off on a walkabout. She made great sacrifices. And you know what? She was by his bedside when he left. Because she was willing to love him with the sacrificial love of God. Agape is the greatest, most complete level of love that there is. It's the most intimate. It's the greatest connection. And it's the true love. Eros can be faked. Storge, let's face it, how do you like your family vacations? Storge, your family love, it can be faked. Even your phileo, sometimes your friend walks in, you're like, oh, brother, I'm about to hear it. It can be faked, but you know what? Agape can't be.
Yes. Amen.
It cannot be faked because you can see in real, genuine terms when someone is sacrificing for you or when they're sacrificing for themselves. For a simpler definition, love is putting ourselves in the other's place. We talked about it in Sunday school. What's the opposite for one of my Sunday school boys? What's the opposite of love?
Selfishness.
What was the two-letter one?
Me.
Me. That's it. We often think that the opposite of love is hate, and it's really true, but at its very base, the opposite of agape love is me. And looking out for number one, that's actually what my uncle preached on yesterday. So I had to change up because I wasn't going to preach his sermon. Love is putting ourselves in someone else's place. Well, the Bible tells us that God is love, correct? So if God is love, what would be the greatest way of showing his love? Putting himself in our place.
Amen.
Leaving all of heaven's glory, all of its beauty, all of its majesty, all of its power to come down and take the place of a fool like me.
Yes.
There's no greater love than this. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but I have not agape love. And by the way, each time he mentions love here, it is the agape. I have become a sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy, and I understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I can remove mountains, but I have not love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all of my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, but I have not love, it profits me nothing. Love suffers long and is kind. Love doesn't envy. Love doesn't parade itself. It's not puffed up. It doesn't behave rudely. It doesn't speak on its own. It's not provoked. It thinks no evil. It does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. Agape love bears all things, even the weight of all of the sin of the world on its shoulders. Agape love believes all things, and it hopes all things, that his sacrifice was not in vain for you and for me. Agape love endures all things. Agape love never fails. But whether there are prophecies, they will fail. Whether there are tongues, they will cease. Whether there is knowledge, they will vanish away. And now, verse 13, abide faith, hope, and love. These three, but the greatest is agape. The title of my sermon this morning, that was the introduction. Aren't you happy? No, it really wasn't. That was introduction and point one. No fear. The title of my sermon this morning was, I love. I, when we say I love, I is the source of the love. If you want to go water your garden, you don't just take an empty hose out and lay it there and hope water's going to come. As a matter of fact, you don't even necessarily go to the faucet and turn the faucet on and hope there's water. The water has a source that's much beyond your home, is it not? When I say that I love, I am taking what I have, it's my source, and I'm giving it out. For God so loved. God was the source of love. And because He loved, He sent His only Son. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 22, and we're not going to read it all, but Paul talks to the church at Ephesus about the organization that God has planned for the family. And in verse 25, he says, "Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of the water by the word, that he might present to her himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish." Now, aren't you ladies happy I didn't read the first part of that? Down to verse 32. This is a great mystery. By the way, if you've been following our Bible studies, what is the great mystery that Christ revealed in his parables and Paul revealed in his writings? The church is the bride. And we are joint heirs, co-heirs with him for eternity. Amen. This is a great mystery. But I speak concerning Christ and the church. Love is something that is always moving. It is an object. It can be a conceptual idea. It can be a verb, and most times it is. But love, if it's sitting there, does nothing. And let's face it, if I say that I have love and I don't, all I care about is me, what do I have to give out? Nothing. Because I have no source of that love. I have nothing to give out. If you ask me for $1,000, I could tell you that I love you. And I could tell you that I could give you $1,000 until I looked in my wallet. And then you might be in trouble. So it is with love. A light bulb doesn't turn on by itself. It has to have a power source. The source of love is I. Whether it's you saying it to someone else, or someone else saying it to you, or most of all, God saying it to you. There has to be a source of love. So we say I, and then we say love. And we talked about love and its definition as a verb and as an action. So what are we missing? The source is I. The verb or the action, wait a minute. The verb or the action is love. What we're missing, why is that slow? Is the object. And the object is you. When God says, I love you, God being the source, God doing the love, it's all pointed to you, the object. Every single one of us in here. You see, the scriptures say that from the foundation of the world the Lamb was slain, which meant long before he created the earth that we live on, the winds and the waves and the sun and the moon, before he did all of that, he said, I love you, and one of these days I'm going to show you Doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter what you've become. It doesn't matter how bad you've been. It doesn't matter how many times you slipped up. It doesn't matter how many times you heard and still not obeyed. He still died on the cross because he loves you, the object. Love is the great and eternal gift. All of the greatest things in this world are born out of love, agape love. I was going to try and find a moving illustration of a love story, but I realized there's nothing greater than 7 wounds in my Savior for me that he bears for all eternity. You know, when you were first dating, perhaps, maybe you don't date, I don't know. But when you were first dating, you were probably, and even married, because we did this for a while, Sonny and I. We were a little coy and a little sheepish. We didn't want to be completely vulnerable. And so, there were some noises we just didn't want to make in front of each other, you know. You'd go in the other room so they wouldn't hear. Maybe you'd try to muffle the sound. Maybe you tried to get buggy-eyed and red-faced trying to prevent it from happening. But eventually, the love of your life would hear what? When you laugh, that you sound like a pig. Now, maybe you thought I was going somewhere directly different. I don't know. Shame on you. But the closer you get, the more vulnerable you become. The problem is, we are extremely vulnerable before we've ever come to Christ. And we must come completely vulnerable before we can ever accept Him. You see, if we want to come up to the altar and say, God, I'm sorry for this sin and this sin and this sin, but I really enjoy these and I'm not going to give those up, you're not going to get salvation. If you're going to hold on to these sins, you might as well not ask forgiveness of these ones either. We have to become completely vulnerable before the one that loves us. And that is intimacy. That is agape love. But I want you to take that thought just a little bit further with me. We want to try and hide things from God, but how dumb is that? If God lives in you, guess what? He sees you at your best and your worst. He sees you when you wake up and you've got pillow head. He sees you when you look in the mirror. He sees you when you look on the weight scale. But even further than that, He knows your very thoughts. He says, Jesus said, Revelation chapter 2:23, I am the one who searches the thoughts and the intents of every person. And I will give to each of you whatever you deserve. I want you to think about your thought life lately. You can't hide it. I mean, it's as bad as running around in a parking lot saying, God, you can't see me. Going behind the closet saying, God, you can't see me. It doesn't matter where you go. You're not out of His reach. And further than that, neither is your thought life. Neither is your selfishness. Neither is your pride. Neither is your anger. All of these things He sees. And you're bare naked before Him. Who loves A.W. Tozer? Jesus Christ knows the worst about you. Nonetheless, He is the one that loves you the most.
Amen. Praise His name.
It's not because you're that great and He sees what you got and says, wow, you're doing good. It's because He's that great. It's because He's that forgiving. It's because He's that patient. He's that kind. He's that loving. He's seen the worst in you. He's seen the worst in me. And He loves me the most. We are the object of His That makes love outward. A.W. Tozer also said this: you have not done anything about truth until you've acted on it. I'd like to change his wording just a little bit and say, you have not done anything about love until you've acted on it. You could have a whole host of people that love you, and you be a miser in your home. You could have a whole host of people that care and want your best interest at heart, and you sit off in the corner and want nothing to do with them. What a miserable life. 1 John chapter 3, verse 16 says, by this we know love, agape love, because he laid down his life for us. And we also ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. But whoever has the world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? My children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. And by this we know that we are of the truth, and assure our hearts before him. Love is always outward. What you receive in is what you can give out. But if you have no source outside of yourself, you have nothing to give. And what a terrible disappointment of a life that would be. Last week, in the last 2 weeks actually, we talked about life. And life not just consuming, but life giving out, life fulfilling a purpose, the purpose that God has created us to be. And the purpose that God has created us to be is to develop love. The first fruit of the Spirit is love. The basis of our Christian walk is love. And if you don't have that, you are missing out on so much that you could be having. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said this: those who love their dream of a Christian community more than the Christian community itself become destroyers of that Christian community, even though their personal intentions may be ever so honest, earnest, and sacrificial. Maybe to sum it up, if we care more about the idea of our community than the person in the community, we've destroyed it. Bonhoeffer would know. He was a German that died in a concentration camp. He was a pastor in Germany. Heaven help us if we get to more caring about God having a godly community than caring about the lost that are in that community. If we've failed there, do we really have any love at all? Love is meant to be from a source, as an action, to an object. And since we have so freely received, may we freely give. Not so that we have this model godly society, but that the lost in our community are saved. That those that are broken inside our own homes would be healed. That those that don't understand this love might experience it for themselves. Kylie,